Step out of the vehicle, boy, and keep your hands where I can see them, Officer Clay snarled, one hand resting arrogantly on the holster of his belt, the other pointing at the spotless black BMW parked by the side of a quiet suburban highway. His mirrored sunglasses reflected the gleam of the morning sun and none of the shame that should have come with his words. His partner, Officer Reese, stood a few feet behind him, arms crossed. Chewing gum like this was just another episode of Cops on a Lazy Sunday. Inside the car sat a tall black man in a crisp navy blue suit, his jaw tight, fingers frozen on the steering wheel. His name was Elijah Brooks. He was 32, calm, poised. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, then the dash cam. It was on. Good. He slowly rolled down the window and answered with deliberate clarity. "Is there a reason you've pulled me over, officer?" Clay let out a scoff. "Oh, we'll get to that. Step out now, before I pull you out myself." His voice dropped to a near whisper, laced with venom. "You think driving a car like this in my neighborhood doesn't raise eyebrows?" Reese chuckled behind him. "He probably borrowed it from someone who actually works." Elijah's nostrils flared, but his expression didn't change. "I will comply, but first, I need to reach into my glove compartment to retrieve my credentials." "Is that all right with you, officer?" Clay rolled his eyes dramatically. "What? You're going to pull out your rap sheet instead?" He laughed, nudging Reese, who barked out another laugh. "Just move slow. No funny business, or I'll make you eat gravel." Elijah opened the glove box with practiced calm. Inside sat a leather folder embossed in gold, with a seal of the African Union. He pulled it out silently and handed it over. Clay snatched it like a bully grabbing a lunchbox. He opened the folder lazily, already forming the next insult in his head until he saw the insignia. His face paled. Inside the folder was a diplomatic passport reel, unambiguous, impossible to miss. Elijah Brooks was listed as Deputy Chief of Mission for the Republic of Ghana, assigned to Washington, D.C. And below the folder, clipped neatly to the registration, was proof that the car was registered under diplomatic plates, temporary ones, yes, but valid, and legally protected under the Vienna Convention. Reese peered over his shoulder. "What's the holdup?" Clay said nothing, his lips parted slightly. He swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the dashcam's blinking red light and Elijah's phone, still recording quietly from the dashboard. Elijah looked at him squarely now. "Would you like to explain to your superiors why you racially profiled a diplomat?" Clay stammered. "I didn't. You were. We had reports. You had no probable cause, no reported stolen vehicle, no traffic violation. You saw a black man in a luxury vehicle and decided that was enough. You mocked me, threatened me, insulted me." Reese took a step back, suddenly very interested in his boots. Clay turned to him. "Get back to the cruiser. Now." "But now," Reese hesitated, then walked back. Elijah stepped out slowly, standing tall, adjusting his cuffs, as if he had all the time in the world. He looked Clay straight in the eye. "I will be filing a formal complaint with your department and the State Department. My government takes racial profiling of its diplomats very seriously." Clay's face went from red to ashen. "Sir, maybe we got off on the wrong foot." "No," Elijah said sharply. "You stepped on the wrong foot when you laughed. When you said, boy, when you assumed I didn't belong. I belong more here than your badge deserves to." The silence stretched long and heavy. Then Elijah reached for his phone, tapped a contact. "Ambassador Awua, yes. I need you to contact the legal attaché and file an incident report." "Yes, Arlington PD. 2 white male officers. I've got everything recorded." Clay stepped back. "Look, please, this doesn't have to escalate." "It already has," Elijah replied, with the calm rage of someone who's had to endure this for far too long. "But I will make sure it ends with change." He got back in the car, started the engine. Clay stood frozen, badge suddenly heavier than it had ever been. And then the black BMW pulled off its diplomatic plates, gleaming like justice in the sun. Elijah didn't go straight home. Instead, he drove straight to the Embassy of Ghana in Washington, D.C., about 40 minutes away. He parked in the designated diplomatic lot, showed his ID to the security detail, and walked in with the quiet grace of a man who'd walked these marble halls many times, but this time, with fire in his chest. Inside, he was greeted by a young attaché, Kwame, who noticed the tension in Elijah's jaw immediately. "Sir, is everything all right?" "No, I need to see the ambassador now." Kwame didn't ask questions. He turned on his heel and led Elijah down the corridor to Ambassador Awa's office. The door opened almost instantly. "Deputy Brooks," the ambassador said, rising from his desk. A stately man in his 60s. He looked concerned. "I got your call. What happened?" Elijah stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "I was pulled over for nothing. Just outside Arlington. Racial profiling. Humiliation. They laughed in my face until they saw the plates." Ambassador Awa's brow furrowed. "Do you have it recorded?" Elijah took out the dashcam card and his phone, handing both over. Every second, the words "boy" came out of that officer's mouth like I was in 1950s Alabama. "I want this elevated. No internal affairs cover-up. I want this to make waves." The ambassador didn't flinch. "Then waves you shall have." An hour later, the footage was already secured. Multiple backups saved, and legal teams notified. Elijah sat silently in the ambassador's lounge, sipping a cup of mint tea he hadn't asked for. His fingers tapped nervously on the side of the cup, mind racing. He wasn't just angry for himself. He was angry for every time this had happened to someone without a title. He was angry for the days he used to drive his beat-up Honda and still got pulled over twice a month. He was angry for his younger brother Jalen, who once got slammed into a police cruiser for matching a description. He was angry for his father, who died never believing real change would come. Now, for once, Elijah had power, and this time, he wasn't going to be quiet. By Monday, the footage was all over the news. Black diplomat profiled by police in viral video. Read CNN's ticker. MSNBC showed the dashcam clip on loop. Social media exploded. #diplomat, while black trended on Twitter. Clay and Reese's names weren't released at first, but the internet did what the internet does. Within hours, their faces, names, badge numbers, and even high school photos were plastered on Reddit and TikTok. Memes began to circulate. When you realize the criminal you profiled could have your job shut down with a phone call. Clay's neighbors avoided eye contact at the grocery store. His kids got funny looks at school. The department's PR team scrambled to do damage control. But the storm was only beginning. Inside the Arlington Police Department, Chief Lorraine Bennett stood in the war room, red-eyed and furious. "I want to know what the hell happened," she barked, slamming her coffee mug on the table. "Who the hell pulls over a BMW with diplomatic tags and doesn't even check the plate before acting like a cowboy?" An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Captain Hughes cleared his throat. Technically, the tags were temporary diplomatic, smaller print, harder to identify. They used the word "boy." Hughes. They laughed at him. "You think that's hard to identify?" Nobody answered. She turned to her assistant. "Pull me every prior stop Clay and Reese have made in the last 3 years. If there's a pattern, I'll bury them." Meanwhile, Elijah was inundated with media requests. BBC, Al Jazeera, The Washington Post. Everyone wanted the story. He declined most of them, sticking only to one exclusive PBS Frontline, where he sat under a single light and told the story in calm, powerful tones. "I've worked with presidents," he said. "I've spoken at the but none of that mattered when they saw me on that highway. All they saw was black skin. All they saw was a threat." The interviewer leaned in. "What do you want to come out of this?" "I want accountability. I want every police officer to know that their actions can and will be seen." And I want the young black boy watching this to know you are not powerless. But it wasn't just a media firestorm. Behind the scenes, things were boiling. 3 days later, a formal complaint was filed with the USSTATE department by the Ghanaian embassy. This triggered an international diplomatic incident. Secretary of State Alicia Rivera found herself on the phone with Ambassador Awuah. We deeply regret what happened. We're committed to full transparency. The Vienna Convention was violated. Awuah replied, "We respect the rule of law, Secretary Rivera, but that respect must go both ways." As pressure mounted, the Arlington mayor issued an official apology, but Elijah hadn't asked for an apology. He wanted systemic change. At the police station, Clay sat alone in an interrogation room, not as an officer, but as the subject of an internal investigation. He looked tired, defensive, bitter. "I didn't know he was a diplomat," he muttered. "He looked suspicious. That's all." The investigator leaned in. What made him suspicious? Clay hesitated. The silence hung. Was it the suit? The investigator pressed. The car? The fact that he followed protocol? Or was it just the color of his skin? Clay shifted. "I've got 20 years on the force, and this could end them." Back at the embassy, Elijah stood before a group of young interns, delivering an impromptu speech. "You'll face disrespect. You'll face ignorance, but don't let them define your dignity. You carry your name, your heritage, your country, and no badge, no gun can take that from you." They applauded. But one young woman, barely 20, raised her hand. "Sir, weren't you afraid?" Elijah smiled sadly. "Of course I was. But fear's a reminder, not a master. You acknowledge it, then you walk right through it." By the end of the week, Clay was suspended without pay pending termination. Reese resigned before the hearing. Chief Bennett announced a new department-wide retraining initiative on racial bias and diplomatic protocol. Elijah didn't celebrate, not really, because none of it erased the humiliation, but maybe, just maybe, it opened a door. Elijah didn't sleep much that week. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw that officer's face, not angry, not afraid, but amused. That was what haunted him, the laughter. Like his entire existence was a joke. He'd wake up with clenched fists and sweat down his neck. The same two words ringing in his ears: "Step out, boy." By Friday morning, his voicemail was full. His inbox drowning in invitations. Panels, forums, interviews, bot protests. Civil rights leaders were quoting him. Senators were referencing him in speeches on the Senate floor. He'd become a symbol, the face of something bigger than he ever intended. And yet, he hadn't asked for this. He hadn't asked to be a hashtag. He just wanted to be seen as a man. But fate didn't wait for permission. At the Civil Liberties Public Forum in D.C., finally agreed to speak. The auditorium was packed. Cameras lined the back wall. At the front row sat students, diplomats, and local activists. Elijah stood behind the podium wearing the same suit he wore the day. Clay pulled him over, not out of coincidence, but defiance. "My name is Elijah Brooks," he began, voice steady. "I am a diplomat. I am a son. I am a brother. I am a citizen of Ghana. And last week, I was a suspect because I was black in the wrong zip code." The room fell silent. "I could talk to you about policy, about reform, about legal codes and racial bias data, but none of that matters unless we change how we see each other. Because before the badge, before the car, before the authority, that officer looked at me and saw less." He paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. "I want to live in a world where no one needs a diplomatic plate to be treated with dignity." Applause erupted, slow at first, then rising like a wave. But Elijah didn't smile. Because applause doesn't erase trauma. It only buries it deeper under sound. That same day, the Department of Justice launched a formal review of discriminatory patterns in traffic stops across Arlington and neighboring districts. Clay's case was no longer just an isolated incident. It became the tip of an iceberg. And beneath the surface, thousands of stops, just like Elijah's. Thousands of names nobody remembered, except Elijah did. He remembered every name he read in the DOJ report. He highlighted them, printed them, posted them on his office wall like a memorial. Because this fight wasn't about him anymore. It was about them. Weeks later, he received a subpoena. Clay was suing the department for wrongful termination. He wanted his badge back. He claimed he was a scapegoat. And Elijah, he was called to testify. The day of the court hearing, the nation held its breath. Every major outlet lined up outside the courthouse steps. Protesters held signs reading diplomatic immunity equals basic human rights, and racism in uniform is still racism. Inside the courtroom, Elijah sat alone on the witness bench, staring at Clay across the room. The former officer looked smaller now, slumped, hollowed out. His attorney whispered something in his ear. Clay didn't respond. The judge, a black woman with sharp eyes and steel resolve, called the court to order. Elijah Brooks. The prosecution began. Can you recount, under oath, what happened that morning on Route 46? Elijah didn't hesitate. I was stopped for no reason. I was called boy. I was laughed at. I was threatened. I was treated as if I didn't belong on American soil. The room went quiet. Was any part of the stop justified? None. Did Officer Clay ever apologize? No, not once. Clay's lawyer stood. Mr. Brooks, isn't it true that your diplomatic plates were temporary and not clearly visible from a distance? They were clearly marked, registered, and legal. But isn't it possible Officer Clay simply made a mistake? A mistake, Elijah said slowly, is missing a speed sign, not calling a grown man boy and laughing in his face. That wasn't a mistake. That was muscle memory. Gasps echoed across the courtroom. The lawyer stammered, Your Honor, sustained. The judge cut in. Watch your line of questioning. After 3 tense days of testimony, the judge delivered her verdict. This court finds that Officer Clay's conduct constitutes a clear abuse of authority, rooted in racial bias. The termination stands. Case dismissed. The room exploded with applause. Elijah just closed his eyes, not in triumph, but in relief, because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it just exhales. That night, Elijah walked the long path back to the Ghanaian embassy, the air cool and quiet. He stood beneath the flag and looked up. He thought of his father again, a cab driver who once told him, Make your name so powerful, son, they'll have to respect your skin. And now they did. But it came at a cost. At home, Elijah stood in front of his mirror, loosened his tie, and stared into his own eyes. You did good, he whispered to himself, but a tear rolled down anyway, because being strong didn't mean he didn't hurt. It just meant he kept walking through the fire. 2 months passed. The world didn't stop. The news cycle moved on. Another scandal, another outrage, another trending hashtag. But Elijah Brooks's name still echoed in the halls of embassies and civil rights conferences. He was no longer just a diplomat. He was a symbol whether he wanted to be or not. Invitations flooded in. Harvard wanted him to speak on systemic bias. The UN asked him to participate in a panel on racial justice. Time magazine named him one of the 100 most influential voices of the year. But the spotlight never felt warm. It felt like standing beneath a surgical lamp, everyone watching, expecting, dissecting. So Elijah did what he always did when the world got too loud. He visited his brother Jalen's grave. It was a quiet Sunday morning. The cemetery was empty. Rows of stones stretched out in all directions like a silent choir. Elijah knelt beside the headstone, ran his hand across the carved letters. Jalen Brooks, 1994, 2012, beloved son, forever free. He sat back on his heels and exhaled. Hey, little brother, he whispered. You remember when you said nobody would ever believe us? When they slammed you against that cruiser for walking home from school? He paused. They believe now, or at least they have to look. That's something, right? A breeze rustled the nearby trees. Elijah leaned back and looked at the sky. They tried to laugh me off the road, Jay, just like they laughed at us all those years ago. But this time, the whole world saw. They saw you, too. He stayed there a long time, just listening, just remembering, because justice wasn't only served in courtrooms. Sometimes it bloomed quietly in a cemetery, beneath a tree, next to a name that should lived longer. 3 days later, Elijah walked into a classroom in Southeast D.C., not for a panel, not for a camera, but for something real. A group of high school students waited, half interested, half skeptical. Most were young, black, brown, wearing hoodies and headphones, arms crossed, like the world already owed them a fight. He understood that look. He'd worn it once. "Mr. Brooks," the teacher said, "thanks for coming. This is our civic studies class. We're talking about rights, policing, and your story came up." Elijah nodded and took off his jacket. "I'm not here to lecture," he said. "I'm just here to talk. You all heard what happened to me, right?" A few heads nodded. A boy in the back raised his hand. "You the dude that punked the cop on camera?" The class laughed. Elijah smiled faintly. "If that's what you took from it, sure. But I didn't punk anyone. I stood still and let the truth show itself." Another girl spoke up. "You wasn't scared? I was terrified," he said softly. "But fear's just a hallway. You walk through it long enough, you get to the other side." The room fell quiet. Then a voice came from near the window. A boy, 17 maybe. Quiet, eyes too old for his face. "They did that to my cousin last year. Slammed him on the ground. Said he looked suspicious." "He was 14. Elijah nodded. "What's his name?" "Deshaun. Well, I don't know him, but today, I speak for him too. Just like I speak for Jalen. Just like someday, maybe you will speak for someone else." A shift happened in that room. Not loud, not sudden, but real. And that was all Elijah needed. Months passed. One evening, as Elijah stood outside the United Nations building in New York, preparing to deliver a global address on human rights and international racial equity, a staffer approached him. "Mr. Brooks, someone's here asking for you. Says he met you years ago." Elijah frowned. "Who?" The staffer shrugged. "A kid. Said he used to work at a car wash. Said you once gave him your card and told him to stay in school." Elijah's eyes widened. It couldn't be. He walked through the marble halls, past security, and out into the visitor lobby. And there, tall, lean, nervous, stood a young black man in a gray suit, holding a notepad. "Elijah," the young man said. Elijah blinked. "Aaron." Aaron grinned. "You remember me. How could I forget? You were scrubbing my tires and talking about getting into law school." "I did," Aaron said proudly. "Georgetown. Last semester now, interning at the UN." Elijah stared, stunned. "I saw the video," Aaron continued. "Saw the speech. And I just wanted to thank you for being what I didn't think I could be." Emotion rose in Elijah's chest like a wave. "You did that yourself." Aaron, the young man, hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged him. Not a handshake, not a photo op, just a real human hug. That night, Elijah stood beneath the lights of the unassembly hall, camera flashes blinking like stars. His speech was already prepared, typed, edited, but when he reached the podium, he folded the paper, placed it aside, and spoke from the heart. "I've stood in courtrooms. I've stood on the side of the road. I've stood in cemeteries. But tonight, I stand here not as a victim of racism or a survivor of injustice, but as a witness." He looked into the crowd, a witness to what happens when silence is broken, when truth is spoken, when dignity refuses to bow. He paused, his voice trembling now. "And I speak not only for myself. I speak for every Jalen, every Deshaun, every young soul who ever wondered if their life mattered enough to be defended. I'm here to say, yes, it does. Always." The hall rose in a standing ovation, but Elijah didn't hear the claps. He heard his father's voice, in his mind, whispering, "Make your name powerful." And now he had. Not through rage, not through violence, but by refusing to bow.